Welcome to another quick run through GCSE Warfare Through Time short revision clips. This one is on medieval tactics and we'll get through this in 3 or 4 minutes hopefully. As far as tactics were concerned and strategy in medieval warfare, still typically you get kings and barons using warfare as a means to get or hold on to power, but there were limitations to this. They had to practice warfare in a very limited, careful way. Now, there's a number of reasons at this. Firstly, they might have limited resources. In other words, quick campaigns with small armies were what you were after, rather than long drawn-out campaigns. And kings, of course, would need the support of powerful nobles for the recruitment of armies through the feudal system at that point too. So there were limitations that monarchs faced when setting out a strategy, a military strategy during this period. Other limitations were the weather and seasons of the year. For example, it wasn't practical to fight during the winter months. It would affect the movement of troops in the mud and the cold and the rain. Men were also busy farming at certain times of the year, for example in the spring and during the harvest, so that would hinder recruitment. Communications were difficult, so you didn't even know where your enemy was at any given time during medieval warfare. So battles were rare, they tended to be best avoided, and it was often cheaper and more effective to rely on methods of strategy such as raids, stealing supplies, besieging castles, etc. Now, castles and walled towns were part of a defensive strategy during this period. Keeping these or capturing them as bases for troops and supplies was important, and obviously was a big focal point of military campaigns. Eventually, of course, towards the end of the period, the development of cannons would make castles a little bit more vulnerable than earlier in the period. In terms of on the battlefield, tactically, it was all location, location, location. You would situate your forces on top of a hill, which would give you lots of advantages. You would make sure your forces were protected on the flanks and from behind. So your physical environment was very, very important. So you would think about woods, forests, rivers, marshland. All of these would be important ingredients in you deciding where your battle should take place. And you can see this clearly at Falkirk and Agincourt, where local geographical features were used in the choice of the battle positions of the rulers at that time. As far as the cavalry was concerned, the main tactic was, of course, the cavalry charge, which was a thunderous mounted charge by knights with the aim to smash through the defences of your enemy. You can see this being used, obviously, at Falkirk in 1298. Once you've crashed through the enemy defences, the rout and chase would then ensue, where fleeing foot soldiers would basically be chased and harried and hacked to death by the knights on horseback. Infantry tactics were all defensive. It was about forming a shield wall. You would overlap your shields, hold out spears and pikes and try and hold out against your enemy. If you managed to repel your enemy cavalry charge, then you could go after your enemy. You could attack the foot soldiers on the other side, and this would result in pretty brutal hand-to-hand combat, which is known as a melee, using swords, clubs, fists, daggers, whatever you can put your hands on, really. Now, tactics are beginning to change during the medieval period. For example, you could cite the schiltron devised by the Scots and used at the Battle of Falkirk, which was a very effective defence against cavalry charges. And this marked the beginning of the decline of the mounted knight in warfare, the end to that sort of cavalry charge being the main method of warfare. Added to this, you can also at Falkirk see the English use of the longbow, raining down that storm of arrows against the Scottish schiltrons, which won the day at Falkirk. And therefore, in future years, the infantry archer would become more important on the battlefield than the mounted cavalry knight, and obviously tactics would reflect these changes and developments.